Hello everyone and welcome back. I'm Saskolinas. Today we're going to draw some poppies, but before we start, please pause to read this if you're having photosensitive issues while watching some videos that have light changes. In this video, I've noticed that my curtain was moving a lot and it created some harsh, warm and cool light tones, and I changed it to black and white, but some light changes are still noticeable, as you can see in this portion. So if this is too much for you, I truly apologize. If you still want to watch it, I do have some suggestions, but then again, I don't know how are you looking at this and processing the light changes. So in a way, I suggest if you want to look into this tutorial to look at timestamps. That will be way easier for you to navigate how I divided the drawing of this flower into specific steps. I'll try to narrow it down as much as possible to help you, and I do apologize for the inconvenience. I'll make sure to avoid making this mistake in my next videos. Again, if you're still here, thank you for watching, and I will now explain my drawing process for this poppy flower. For this one, I'm using a photo reference that you're going to have a link down below for zooming in purposes, again, that I always suggest for you to do. And in this stage, I'm using a half circle shape and a rectangular shape for these two flowers that I'm going to draw. And for the petals, I'm looking at the most basic geometric shapes that they can have, and I'm trying to replicate that onto the basic step outline that I'm having for these two flowers. And in this case, I'm really focusing on the negative space between them so that I can learn what are the gaps between every single petal and also learning their shapes. So in this stage, I do suggest that you look as a flower, as an entire flower in the photo reference, and also look at the details of every single petal so that you can learn which one has more of a rounded shape, which one looks more like a triangle, and which one looks more like a rectangle or something like that, or something that's in between all of these basic geometric shapes. So I do suggest to start off with that so that it will help you learn what is the placement of those things, and also help you with the movement of the entire flower so that it won't look as stiff as it may be if you start carving out the details all of a sudden. Next, when I'm done with all of that for these two flowers, I also added smaller details at the bottom that are only containing the central part. I'm carving out the shape. Okay, so the next step will be to carve out the petals. So once we have this initial rough guideline based on some geometric like shapes, we're going to start carving out the petal in its entirety. So here I'm looking at the photo reference and really starting to feel how are all of these petals behaving. So I'm focusing on the first two that I'm seeing at the bottom because they're slightly bending towards that front part and they're not fully upwards. So I'm trying to replicate that, and again, here you can really zoom into the photo reference to see where are they overlapping, where are they bent, and also if you're noticing any of those details that you want to replicate in your sketch. Once I'm done with these two, I'm starting with the inner center with the other two petals that I'm seeing. They're fairly simple. They kind of look like some of the most standard petals. So I'm loosely basing them off of the photo reference and looking at ways where they connect, what the negative space between them is, and also where they overlap. And once I'm done with all of that, the next part would be to look at the center. It has that cup-like shape at the very center, and that is surrounded by a lot of tiny details that I'm in here just going to shade in so that I will know the placement approximately. And the last one for this first flower will be the petal that's fully behind everything else, and it kind of looks big in comparison to the other four. So I'm looking at the distance between all of them and where the left part and the right part of this petal starts, and how far is it behind the other two that are in the center. So I'm looking at all of those distances to determine how I'm going to create it. And for the other flower, which is, to be honest, super tricky and it's kind of blurry in the photo reference, I wanted to show you how you can use something like that to create another detail into your drawing. So I'm looking at the photo reference and seeing the difference in lighting and color to determine where are the petals placed, and also how are they behaving, where are they overlapping, where are they bent, and how far are they going. So I'm looking at this one and I'm seeing only 4, one at the front and 2 in the middle, one that's in the background, and I'm trying to replicate that as best as possible. In this case, since the photo reference for this one is not as perfect, you can go loosely. It's good for practicing because you're starting to get a feel of how is this behaving and how are you seeing different colors and shades to help you learn how to create a flower out of that. And once I'm done with all of that, I'm looking at some details that I wanted to add to help me with the inking process later. So I'm using this pencil to shade in some parts that I'm seeing in the photo reference, and this is a really loose shading technique, nothing special. You can cross hatch, you can do whatever you prefer. In this case, I just wanted to loosely shade in some pieces to help me with the inking process later and help me understand how is this flower behaving. So in this stage, you are looking at the entirety of this sketch and seeing if something feels off. If you're noticing that, for example, you are seeing that the center part is not perfect, you can correct it always. Also the petals, whatever you see that it's kind of looking off in this stage, it's time to fix it because the next one is inking. And here I'm using my 0.3 fine liner to outline the petals fully. And in this case, I'm not using perfect lines or anything like that. When I'm close to the edge of the petal or I'm drawing the very edge of every single petal, I'm looking at the photo reference and seeing where the petal is kind of wavy. So I'm trying to replicate that with some zigzag movement, and small imperfections like that will really add to that organic look of the flower. So in this stage, you don't have to go super perfect. You can create a bit more of a messy line for the outline, and it will add more details and a better organic look for the illustration. And in this case, I started working on the stem first and I made a mistake, so I suggest you to start with the central part first and then at the very end create all of those stems. But here I made a mistake, and as you may see, I have 3 lines over there. So now I'm working on the center part, outlining what I'm seeing, and in the very middle of that shape I'm creating a black dot in the very center and surrounding it with lines so that it looks kind of like a sun, because in the photo reference I'm seeing that it has that type of pattern, so I'm replicating that. And also on the right petal in the center I'm seeing some black texture on the petal, so I'm replicating that with my pencil first, because in the next stage I'm going to create those tiny little dots that are surrounding the center, and here I'm just using some basic elliptical shape to create those dots, and I'm connecting them with the central part with a simple line. That's pretty much it. And in this case, you need to look at the photo reference and see where are they more sparse and where are they really crowded, because none of these are super perfect. There are some gaps and different lengths of these details. So replicate that as best as you can and add as many details as you want to, but be aware, because if you're using black ink, try to not overwhelm the very edge so that you will still see some information in the drawing. And once all of that is done, I'm going to ink the petals. I'm going really simple with this one. I'm only creating some lines from the outline towards the center and from the center towards the outline or the edge of the petal. So here you go as much as you need to until you're happy with the result. If you're unsure, you can start with a pencil and then ink it later. In this case, I was pretty sure of what effect do I want to have for this drawing, so I went in with a fine liner. And then if I saw that some things are missing and I'm a bit unsure, as you can see here, I'm using a pencil to add some more details, more shading, and see if I later on want to add some more lines to highlight some of those shaded parts and also the edges of these petals, because it will add to that organicness and the realistic look. Because once you add a couple of lines here and there, the flower kind of comes to life in a way. So here you can follow the way that this flower bends and use that as a guideline when you're creating those lines. And again, this is all based on your personal preference. You can add as many lines as you want to, or even skip the shading part completely, and you will have your own interpretation of this flower. For the first one, it's fairly simple because we see a lot of information on the photo reference. So once you're happy with all of that, you can move on to the other details. For some of these practicing purposes, I wanted to create those central parts at the bottom 3 times without any petals. So this is optional. It's good for practicing because you can see a couple of them in the photo reference as well. And in this case, I'm using that oval cup-like or eye-looking shape because it looks really weird. But here I'm using what I did for the first flower to create these 3. So the first circle that has a black dot and surrounding lines that kind of resembles like a sun, and also the bulb at the bottom and the stem that I'm going to shade in. And for the stems later on, I'm going to add a couple of lines that look like tiny hairs that will add more details to the drawing. And once I'm happy with all of this, I'm going to work on the other flower that's based on a loose photo reference that's a bit blurry. So again, this is a really good practice for you if you want to test your vision, and also the way that you can use some information to contour and create a shape out of it. So here I'm zooming in and seeing where are the differences in lighting, and based on that I'm going to create shapes for these petals. They do look weird in a way, and in this stage honestly I'm using every single principle that I used for the previous flower, but in this case I'm really looking into the differences that I'm seeing in the photo reference and trying to create a flower out of it. So I'm looking at the ways that these petals are bent, if they are. The bottom one and one in the center is, but the others are pretty standard. And I'm loosely shading them with a fine liner to add those lines from the edges towards the center and vice versa. And once I'm done with that flower, I'm stepping back and seeing if I want to add some more details, which I'm now doing. And you can do that also. Again, you can take a step back and see how do you like it, if you would like to add some more shading, some more details, or if you see that something is missing. And once all of that is done, I'm going to create some tiny hairs on all of these stems to add a bit of that realistic look for the flower. And this is pretty much complete. I hope that you found this tutorial useful. Again, it's a good practice for anyone who's a bit unsure of how to carve out specific details and how to look at different parts and determine how are they going to be translated into a sketch. So I hope you found this useful. Here's the final result, and if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and please subscribe for any future videos. I do appreciate when you do. It helps the channel a lot. And yeah, this is my interpretation of this poppy flower, and I hope this inspires you to create your own. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!